Welcome to Everything is a Primary Source, the podcast where pop culture is used to tell about history. We're going to the movies in this episode and all the way back 50 years to February of 1974. Mel Brooks' Blazing Saddles is 50, and what better time to discuss its role as a document of the past? Here's my drop-in guest, Caroline, to talk about the Western comedy which pushed the boundaries to bring up some very important topics a half-century ago. All right, I'm here with Caroline, and you're coming to us from Baltimore. We're in Nashville. Did you fly here, drive here?
I flew here.
Okay.
I flew here.
It would be like 6 hours on the road,
Yeah,
right?
no, I would not do that.
Okay. And so Baltimore, last time I was in Baltimore, we went to Fells Point. We went to the National Dentistry Museum is there.
Yes, I just went there.
And
That is cool.
You don't want to brush that one aside. Yeah. I'll pick at it for... that's such a cool place. Baltimore itself, it's one of those cities that's so, like, authentic.
It's dense. It's dense with what it has to offer, right? Like, you can drive through the whole thing in, like, maybe 30 minutes.
Yeah.
But, like, you can't drive very far without getting a good taste of a whole lot.
Yeah, and it's so... I know it was around before the 19th century, but it just feels like so mid-19th century, all the brick.
Yep.
And,
Oh, yeah.
And everything like that. And,
Yep.
So what we're going to talk about in this little episode, this little segment, is also related to the 19th century, but it's a 1974 comedic version of Western America in the 19th century, and that would be Mel Brooks' Blazing Saddles. So what made you choose this movie out of my collection?
I think this movie was a staple growing up in my household. My dad would watch a lot of Mel Brooks movies and just thought Blazing Saddles was hilarious. Particularly the campfire scene was like his favorite. And I remember watching it the very first time and just being like completely appalled at the movie and going like, this isn't funny. This is like nothing about this movie is funny. I find this completely like I couldn't get past. Like I knew what they were trying to do was funny, but it was like a huge marker for me, I guess, in time. And maybe that might be one of the first times in like as a child where I was like, wow, like things change as we go. And in movies particularly, I think are a really good marker of what life was like in that moment or what we thought life was like in that moment.
You more or less summed up my thesis is that's what pop culture is. It should not be overlooked as being documents, and it can get all kind of mangled up because in this case, it's not based on a real story by any means or even a real place, but the time period is specific. It's about the Old West.
Yes. And
so it's kind of quasi-history, but it's not a document of the Old West. It's a document of 1974.
Right.
Right? Or 73 when they made it.
Yes.
And so it's like, what does that tell us about that really kind of, for our generation, kind of a bizarre take on humor? Because we grew up with Spaceballs. Like, that was made in our lifetime. And that was like... And even that still had some of that old-timey humor that we didn't quite understand.
I loved Young Frankenstein.
But
But I feel like Mel Brooks being a Jewish artist in America and comedian, I think, was able to go places maybe other people weren't particularly allowed or maybe did without it being widely accepted. And his humor, but I think it's interesting to me that was ever a movie that we were like, oh, that's hilarious, it's totally fine, we're just dropping these words left and right. And again, like, my father, who grew up in the Bronx, New York, and his family and our family and a friend circle is very diverse and accepting and open, and to see men of all ages and all types, particularly laughing at this one thing that nowadays would be not okay. Interesting, just an interesting, like, humor does change.
Yep.
And I sometimes see, while I don't understand or agree, all the time with a generation saying, wow, this next generation is softer, right? Like,
yeah.
so I don't know what that, and like, what will we say that's not going to be cool? I remember when I was growing up, people would often say, like, well, that's gay. Ooh, not now.
Yeah.
And but like, I don't know, and everybody would make a big deal. It's not, we're not saying any. So again, I think words change in their meaning, and their weight changes in their meaning, and I think it's an interesting reflection on what was funny at that time. It's kind of where we were
well, just
culturally at that time.
Pop culture has done that for us.
Forever.
Mass media. Friends.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
They have jokes, gay jokes.
Did not age well.
That like in 96 or so.
Right.
You get awkward laughs from the crowd. Oh,
Yeah.
But now it's like,
okay.
Now they write in characters that are exactly,
right.
Because it's a reflection of.
I also think Seventh Heaven is another wonderful, exemplar of like what.
I totally forgot about that show until
check
just
out
now.
Seventh Heaven, because I feel like some of the memes I get there are way, like, they're just hilarious in that you're like, wow, yeah, like this is what our moral compass was, right? Because Seventh Heaven was such a faith-based. This is what a wholesome family does.
Now that I think I did watch I don't think I've ever watched a full episode, but I do remember watching some of it, and I'm like, this is very wholesome.
It is. It was wholesome, and now I look back and it's cringy.
Yeah.
Much like everything else in the past, it becomes cringy.
It can be, and we can use that cringe though to our benefit. So
Absolutely.
what's funny, Mel Brooks was a comedian, like you said, and so his status by the time Blazing Saddles comes out is making comedy movies.
Yes.
And for the most part, I'm not a fan of straight up comedy movies.
No.
Because, like you said, the comedy, even from the early 2000s, those kind of comedy movies, like those Judd Apatow and
Kevin Smith.
Yeah, his are, not. I mean, they don't age well. Remember the era of, it kind of came off the heels of American Pie, and it was the quote factory era, where every movie they would have the DVD extended cut with even more quotes, because they wanted us just to have those Ricky Bobby, Talladega Nights, Step Brothers,
It's like the SNL Next Step movies.
Yeah, we're going to go around repeating these things to each other. And we kind of did for a while. But those movies, I feel most comedy movies, and unfortunately I think Blazing Saddles fits into this category, I think after you hit the 1 hour mark, it just drops off. And so what I find is a really great comedy is one that also has a story. My Cousin Vinny is the best comedy movie because it could be a drama. It's a story you care about, what's going to happen to these kids. They've been wrongly accused. We know that they didn't do anything wrong. What's going to happen to them? And just infusing the cultural clashing, here's a Brooklyn guy comes into Alabama and all that hilarity ensues.
The pushing against female stereotypes as well, with the woman who was drop dead gorgeous and you wouldn't think she knew anything about cars and knew all the things about cars. So again, there's just lots of commentary about society in a quality movie.
And I was just watching on the airplane here my favorite movie of all time, which came out the year before Blazing Saddles, American Graffiti. That's a funny movie too, but it's not a comedy.
No.
So it's if you set out to do a comedy, you rope yourself into every minute of this has to be funny, or at least attempts to be funny.
Right.
And then you end up losing a lot of the story to it. Blazing Saddles does have the part where outside the judge there's just a line of people waiting to get hanged.
Yeah.
That's so weird, but it's it's Simpsons-esque in a way. It's something that you would only see maybe 20 years later. It's ahead of its time.
Yes, absolutely. I like that. I like that comedians in general tend to be the ones to push the envelope, and not always does it work out for them. I mean, I think about this was a good thing for Mel Brooks at the time, but Dave Chappelle, it's a lot of pushback for pushing the envelope in what we find to be acceptable. And I think that is a challenge in comedies. And I think that doesn't always translate well to a movie, the way we describe a movie. Because as a viewer, we've changed. just like
Right.
the art has changed, right? And so when we go to the cinema, we want to be taken on an adventure. And sometimes we want that adventure to just be pure hilarious. And to your point, I don't know that we can do, like, I can't be tickled for an hour and a half.
Yeah.
Now it's not funny anymore. It's just painful. Like, so I think that's I don't think comedy is meant to be an hour and a half long.
Right.
I think it's meant to be a sketch.
45 minutes.
It's meant
tops.
to be a commentary, a stand-up thing. But like, I do think that it is a interesting place for social commentary to take a dangerous step, but a step towards the line or off the line, because that's what comedy does. Like, if you're not offending somebody or run the risk, you can't be afraid to do that, I guess. And that's something that made me realize I could never be a comedian, because I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't mean it that way. That would be my like comedy bit. I'd be like, I'm sorry.
Well, there's plenty of good comedians out
Not
there
you,
that are
not
not insulting,
Sure,
but
sure.
In this media age, and as we're putting our voices out there to dozens, that's about as many listeners I get, but
It's more than me.
maybe
so.
thousands. It's like you can't make everybody happy
Nope.
all the time. But yeah, you're right. If your style of humor is just to try to be a jerk,
Yes.
you're not going to make friends.
No.
That's not fun.
No, the same way if you try in a movie to be an hour and a half of slapstick humor,
Right.
you're going to lose something.
It's like Bugs Bunny cartoons are 5 minutes long for a reason.
The Three
You know,
Stooges did not have a featured film.
Right.
That I recall.
Well, they made them later, and they're terrible. Like they made, like, I think just a couple years ago, a Three Stooges movie.
Oh my God! Yeah,
modern
no,
actors
I was
playing them,
no,
and
gosh, no.
I thought
yeah.
that was going to be a biopic, honestly, but it wasn't. It was like an actual Three Stooges in the modern era, and it was just like, why are you doing this?
Yeah, no, that should not happen.
I'm just going to look up something because there's another movie that I think is, it's not from terribly long before. Have you ever seen Little Big Man with Dustin Hoffman?
Don't think so.
It's so, like you, Blazing Saddles was one of I call them my dad's movies.
Yeah.
Where it's like, and American Graffiti was as well.
Yeah.
That one I got hooked in the first like 6 seconds of the movie. Like as soon as, I don't know if you've ever seen American Graffiti, but as soon as the character of Toad drives his Vespa and crashes it into a newsstand I'm like, this is hilarious. This is awesome. Great movie. Blazing Saddles was one. Little Big Man was another one. Little Big Man fits more. It's humorous. It's more of a dramedy, and so it has a story that you care about. It's about a kind of like an orphaned guy in the Old West, same setting as Blazing Saddles, and kind of bounces back and forth between living among white people and Native Americans. Like he kind of, and that's where he gets his name of Little Big Man is from them. But then he.
Interesting.
And it was one of those movies because 1970 for my dad, he was 22 years old. That's like prime age for watching that kind of movies, and like that one I liked more than Blazing Saddles, and I feel like we watched them like kind of close to each other on VHS. And I'm like, I may have even confused the characters in some of them because of similar motifs of the West and all that. But Little Big Man was funnier because it wasn't an hour and a half of nonstop laughs, like the other one was. So Mel Brooks, that's kind of his thing.
Yes.
I don't know if it's big enough on the form if it says, or on the little poster. Does it say Mel Brooks on the title itself?
Where did it go?
Kind of like when they do like Tim Burton presents.
Yes, Mel Brooks, Blazing Saddles.
Okay, so I guess by that point, he must have, unless that was a retroactive poster.
Or never give a saga an even break. I don't even know if that's what it actually says, but yes.
It probably does, and again, it makes no sense to us.
No.
Well, it's just like when you watch those old Peanuts, the Christmas special. Charlie Brown's, and it's like Lucy says like the doctor is real in. We're like, what? And
you're like, huh?
You have to ask them like, oh yeah, back in the '60s, people said that like, you're real in, man, and that was like the old joke, totally over our head.
Yep.
But because you fixed it into place in time, you can't erase it. You can't update it like a comedy act, a live stand-up comedy act. You can update that, You can edit it. You can cut out stuff. That bombed when I did it in Baltimore.
Yeah.
When I go to, Frederick, from Maryland, or Gaithersburg.
Oof, yes.
My next stop, I'll drop that part.
Yeah.
They don't get the crab jokes there. So I think that, that early 70s was a funny time for all media.
Well, for all history.
And for all, reality.
Right?
It was rough
such
go
a...
for the country.
Really, yeah. It feels a little like the lost decade.
And it's like, do you ever show in any of your classes or in school the American Century series with Peter Jennings as the host? They're fantastic. It was ABC News and History Channel. They did a combined thing late 90s. And I use it all the time when I teach 20th century because they go basically 5 to 10 year spans, through the decades. The one for 1970 to 1974 is called The Approaching Apocalypse.
That sounds about right.
It's a good name.
There we are.
And it's like, Watergate by the end of that year, 74, expelled the president. That was, Vietnam was crashing down. It was crumbling. There was, prison riots in Attica. There was.
The civil rights movement was more or less decapitated.
It just turned into identity politics gone wild, and everybody's marching in the streets and riot.
Yep.
And it's like, it's no wonder that so many artists started to revert in preparation for the bicentennial.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, maybe this was Brooks' thinking of like tapping into America's history in the 70s. Like Little House on the Prairie was a big show in that time, going back to the 1870s and, simpler life.
Well, and John Wayne, and I don't even know if that's his time period, but like Westerns were popular at a point.
Yeah.
Particularly when my dad was like, if these are my dad's movies, I think about him growing up in the 50s and 60s, like Westerns were the thing. And
by 70, when Little Big Man comes out, in 74 by Blazing Saddles, the Western had become a pretty fixed genre.
Right.
And so they could play with it a little bit.
Right.
They're like, okay, now, and similar to, and they haven't stopped playing with it. Tarantino did it twice, Django and the other one, not the Magnificent Seven, that's another movie altogether. But you know the one I'm talking about,
it is the Magnificent, they're like, isn't it the one in winter though?
Yeah, it's...
Yeah.
Well, I'll look it up later, and I'll go back and be like into the podcast. But he dabbled. Breaking Bad is a Western. It's a modern Western.
It is.
That kind of setting, and
which I wonder if that's a uniquely American cinematic occurrence.
It is, but it isn't, because a lot of those '60s ones were made in Italy. Like the spaghetti westerns with Clint Eastwood is more contemporary for the 70s and 60s and 70s, and those movies were made almost like an outsider's view of what American, because the West had become, in that era anyway, post-Civil War West had become such a symbol for the whole globe, not just our country, of ultimate freedom, but also the risks that you take when you're away from civilization.
Well, and American innovation at the expense of
culture,
rights, and freedoms, and but there was certainly it's like
the fresh start, but it's also
and the nostalgic Gilded Age type look of America, where you can build yourself up from nothing and all of the things, and
so it was definitely a needed thing by the 1970s to be like, hey, let's look into. I was just mentioning American Graffiti. That's a nostalgia movie.
Mm-hmm.
It takes place 10 years before, but it's still looking back to simpler time. Pre-Kennedy assassination, when that boomer generation had really taken on adulthood, and they're still kids. Before that all happened and everything. So. Mel Brooks just gave us a solid 25 minutes of conversation, so I can't.
Thanks, Mel.
Thank you. Is he still alive?
He better be.
Okay.
Hold on, we're gonna look that up now.
I don't want to end this before we.
Mel alive? Next episode, Mel Brooks.
Next will be the apology episode of.
I'm sorry, Mel. I think he doesn't have a. Doesn't. Yeah, no, he's still alive.
Okay, maybe he's here.
Baruch Hashem.
Well, I'll tell you what, he would probably get a kick out of us joking around about that.
Oh, Robin Hood Men in Tights. That's the one I grew up with.
Yeah.
That was
with Dave Chappelle.
Yes.
As Achu.
Yes.
And that was right around the same time he did You've Got Mail.
That is true.
So,
oh my gosh.
The edgiest of the comedians.
He is an interesting fellow.
He is. I love him. I think he's great, but I can see why he gets the attention that he does.
Yes. I think when I can appreciate he's reached a level of success that he doesn't have to be worried about the outcome of him saying or trying to do an adventurous thing. I think artists don't do that often anymore.
It's true.
It's all about what's going to sell.
Right. And that's a good way to end. Carolyn, I really appreciate
Thank you. This was so fun. I am officially famous now.
Yes. Please rate and follow this podcast wherever you are listening to it right now, and share it with everyone you know. You can follow the Everything is a Primary Source podcast on social media, including YouTube and especially Instagram. Show notes, which expound on each episode, and essays about history and pop culture can be found on Substack. The hub for all these things is everything-history.com. Thank you for listening to the EPS podcast, where everything is a primary source.